the traditional greeting of the Indigenous people of New Zealand. Please bow your heads. Vita. Thank you. This presentation will bring together a snapshot of New Zealanders who have gone through the health system, navigated the education system, and are here to talk about what it means to be a New Zealander with a disability. Some of these themes are universal, but they have a New Zealand slant. We will talk around these main topics: the experience of growing up in New Zealand, the experiences of childhood, demystifying adulthood, and understanding key discussion questions before we leave it to the floor to ask us questions and we can provide answers. For the sake of the Zoom experience, please could you write your questions in the chat or leave the questions until the Q&A time. The panel here represents a variety of disabilities and a variety of experiences, but we bring together a shared commitment to knowledge translation and passion. What does a New Zealand life represent? A New Zealand life is many things. We have 1 in 4 New Zealanders who identify as having a disability. We have a healthcare system that is largely privatized, although that often doesn't happen in practice. And we have a vast variety of experiences, even though people claim that New Zealand is one small island. We also have several interesting facts about the country on the other side, including the fact that 30% of our country is a national reserve. It's worth considering how is disability framed and how is disability framed in New Zealand. And one thing I wanted to emphasize collectively across our group is that the vast majority of disability-specific facts are and do rely on a deficit model that emphasize the problems and the deficits of disability. And this isn't a New Zealand specific problem. It happens a lot throughout the world. And these facts have their place. They have their place in advocacy, they have their place in government policy, but they don't have their place when discussing with families, whānau, and children. So, as all of you will know, to a less or greater extent, when governments change, the people with disabilities are the ones that are most affected. New Zealand has several outstanding international commitments to disability, and we have a number of codes of rights around disability. But how these are enforced often largely depend on the governments and the systems that are in place. We have our Ministry for Disabilities, by KAHA, but the authorization of that will largely depend on how the new government shapes up. And I've just pointed out to you how we don't want disability to be framed, but this is how we do want disability to be framed in a lot of ways, in a lot of senses. Disability, and in this case, cerebral palsy, is framed from the Indigenous perspective of people who live, Indigenous perspective of the Maori people of New Zealand. And the Te Reo term for cerebral palsy is Hukai Nukurangi, to achieve what's important to you, which is a strength-based model. And fundamentally, the biggest part of this talk that we want to convey is that when you live with a disability, it's not just a physical process. It's not just a manifestation of symptoms. It's not just a simple matter of deficits and disabilities. There are psychological, there are physical, there are practical things to consider. And all of these can have lesser or greater salience or importance depending on how the person feels, how the circumstances at the time, and other factors that come into play when they talk about disability. But each of these play an important role in framing disability and childhood. The experience of childhood, from my perspective as a person with disability, has two central elements. There's the idea of how the child understands disability and how the family that raised that child understands disability. There are two very much simultaneous but different narratives that frame the person and how they grow up. And there are many understated elements of living with that disability. And those can play an important role in shaping how that child becomes a young adult. And as my friend has pointed out here, the parent has a way of shaping the disability and the experience. So it's very much a co-created narrative. And it's worth noting that the disability doesn't need to be blamed for absolutely everything. When talking about a disability childhood, a lot of disability and childhood is framed within the context of the time at which the child is growing up. And in our time, people have to contend with a different understanding of what it means to be social. So social media and how and why how do you talk about disability online, particularly in New Zealand, where it's very much a country that's away from what is perceived to be the rest of the world. One of the most common questions I get is, my child is lonely, or my young person is lonely. And for me, socialization is like any other muscle. It's something that needs to be started early in order to get the best results. So social muscles can be weak if they're not practiced, and very much in that sense, so being social is an important aspect of disability. This slide represents one of my favorite expressions of what it means to live with a disability. The notion of you start with a lack of energy, you lose the energy when you are moving, you don't retain the energy during the sleep cycles, and then you start with low energy. What does it mean to navigate and demystify adulthood? This was one of the central themes I thought about when constructing this talk. There are, again, many different elements to navigating adulthood. What does it mean physically to grow older? What does it mean psychologically? And how do you engage socially with this idea of being an adult who both wants to be an adult with it, who both want to be an adult in every sense of the word, but also has these other elements to consider. And a similar element is demystifying the idea of independence, risk, and decision-making. For a lot of young people with disabilities, they often don't have the opportunity to take as many risks as their able-bodied peers, but also risk is a natural part of growing up. So risk needs to be built around the idea of stamina, considering different environments. Where is this person going to be? What are the support and resources that they're going to need to make these decisions? And adaptability to change. Many disabilities change over the course of their life, but also the circumstances change within which their disability occurs. And from my own experience, one of the biggest things that comes along when you talk about demystifying adulthood is the idea of cutoff points. We talk a lot about you can do whatever you want with or without your disability. But sometimes there has to be practical decisions made around things like driving in my own case. I could almost drive, but it was decided that I shouldn't drive. And so I made the decision around what are the alternatives that I can undertake. These are, and this brings me to the idea of modeling what we mean by adulthood. In that sense of we're acknowledging where accountability and adaptability is all around the idea of acknowledging that adulthood exists, bringing together an adult perspective and a lifespan perspective. And finally, aroha, which is the traditional term for love and connection. And finally, I want to emphasize the idea of you have a lifelong relationship with your disability. So therefore, it's important for people to understand and internalize the idea of physical realities and the giving the sense of allowing for the grief of disability without letting it overwhelm you, which is why I like the stock picture, which demonstrates somebody with a clear disability still connecting in a grown-up setting of being at the pub. And the author I've mentioned on screen does a very good TED talk around the importance of having multiple narratives. And now we're going to put over to the panel to discuss key elements from their perspective of living with a disability. First, we're going to start with Barry, who's going to talk around what aspects of life are important to consider and what is often overlooked. Thank you, Barry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Oh,
Even
cool.
better.
I'm on my phone rather than on my tablet. Yeah, hi, Amy. It's nice to be here. I think for me, growing up was quite a bit easier than for most because my parents virtually ignored me. So it gave me the opportunity to go out in life and experience all sorts of different things. And I was of the era, because I'm 63, before special education came along or any of the specialist services. So I was mainstreamed, what we call mainstream now, but I just went into the general school population and grew up with going through the school system. It was hard as a disabled person because you are different. But I think the issues for me that come along very clearly is that often there's no expectation of the person with a disability to become employed or have a dream for the future. So it immediately puts disabled people in a position of not knowing what life's going to bring. Whereas for me, I had a clear guideline of what I wanted to do and how I saw life. And I set down some really strong challenges that I wanted to meet when I was roughly about 18, which I've been able to achieve all of them, which has been fantastic for my life because I've had a very full life. But I think the big thing is that I don't want to put families down because they do their best, but I think often families try to shelter a disabled person so that they don't want them to experience the bad parts of life. But for me, I've seen the good and the bad, and I think it helps make you stronger as an individual, and it helps you with friends. I was lucky enough when I was growing up to get into rowing. I was the coxswain, and it was really good to be able to go out with the guys and learn a sport that wasn't special, or they didn't let me win because I was disabled. I was a productive member of the crew, and if I didn't achieve, the guys let me know. And that made me realize that I wasn't the center of the universe, that I was part of a bigger picture that I needed to be part of. But I still experienced all the the problems that people have or prejudice around what a disabled person can do. I even got jobs, but people looked over my shoulder the whole time, basically making sure I could do the job. And if I made a mistake, they were quick to jump on the fact that that's perhaps because of my disability. So for me, the really important point is that my mother had a mental illness, and my father I don't know why he had children, but he never followed us very closely. My sisters and I, and they were able-bodied. So it did leave the opportunities open to go and experience the things. I've hitchhiked around New Zealand. I've done small bore rifle shooting. I've been a coxswain for rowing. I tried water skiing, which nearly ended up with me drowning. So the experiences I've had have been very much the same as what other people have had.
And following on from that, Helena, what do you feel are some of the most important resources or elements that helped you navigate both childhood and adulthood and everything in between?
Well, hi everyone, I'm Helena. Funnily enough, my experience is kind of quite similar to Barry's. I agree with not having, I would say from my experience, I also didn't have much of a sheltered experience growing up. So I was born in the 80s. I grew up, I went to school in the 90s, and I had started primary school in the 90s. And I also did all my education through mainstream because my mum insisted I started in mainstream. I think when I first started in school, I think year one, I couldn't even walk properly. So that's why I had to start about 6 months later, because I couldn't walk properly. And that my mum was told, oh, maybe she should put me into a special needs school. And my mum was very stubborn. She said, no, my daughter's gonna start in mainstream because you haven't even given her a chance. How do you know she can't do it? So my mum, my mum and my family are quite, they are the tough love type of family. So I definitely wasn't given much special treatment at home growing up, and I think that did me really well. It meant that I pretty much had quite a normal life, like everyone else. And I suppose in terms of adulthood, I would say during my schooling years, I really didn't have too many barriers, to be honest. Compared to most people, I was really happy with my schooling years. But I think where some of the barriers in life probably came a bit more obvious for me was probably during adulthood, especially when you think about things like for example, transportation. Amy mentioned driving. Like for me, at one point, I considered not driving at all because I just figured it would just be too hard for me. I drive now, but I still can't drive independently. So basically, I would say some of the more important things maybe for parents to consider as their kids are growing older would be things like how their child is going to get around when they get older. For example, in their teenage years, they're going to go out and see friends. Are they going to be able to take public transport by themselves? Are they going to have issues getting on and off the bus, for example? Realistically, are they going to drive? How much will driving lessons cost them? Because I know it cost me a fortune because it took me years to learn to drive. And other things like in terms of getting older, like thinking about accommodation, like where they're gonna live. Are they gonna be living with their parents forever? And also as your health changes, are you gonna be able to live in a 2-story house, for example? Or do you need a fully accessible house? Like, for example, I don't know, as a child, you might be okay climbing stairs, but if your health or mobility gets worse, is having stairs in your house, is that going to be practical? And also thinking forward, also thinking about economic or financial needs, like as a parent, like one day if you and your partner as parents, if you passed away or someone gets hit by a truck, for example, who's gonna look after your child? Are they gonna be able to be independent? So all the things I've mentioned is kind of about how someone with disability is able to be independent as they go into different stages of adulthood. And another thing was I mentioned changing needs across the lifespan, like especially if you're a woman. I'm thinking about one day if I'm gonna have kids, how my CP is gonna impact on my body, and how am I gonna navigate that? I'm still not 100% sure. I'm still a little bit nervous about that myself. But I guess another important aspect is probably also I would say asking questions and trying to think forward in preparation of how your body may change, and I would say in general trying to be proactive from a health perspective. Yeah, I would say those are probably summing up most of the core areas of life, I think. Yeah.
And would you say, Helena, that it's a good, we talked about this before, but it's a good idea to start incorporating a lifespan as an approach as early as possible, so that the idea doesn't hit you like a freight train when the kids are young adults or adults?
Yeah, and that kind of ties into what I was saying about being proactive, and also so when I say proactive, I probably mean proactive and thinking forward, which relates to thinking forward in terms of from a lifespan perspective, like for example, if you're a woman, if you want to have kids, and if you trip over often like me, I'm thinking, one day if I do get pregnant, how am I gonna manage it? Am I gonna be falling over the place, etc.? And like most able-bodied people, our body changes, and like most of my friends are able-bodied and they're in their mid-30s now, and they're complaining about stiff muscles and sore backs, etc. So for them, they notice their body change. So you can imagine that kind of compounds for someone with CP. And the CP is what they call it's not just a childhood disability, it's degenerative, so it degenerates as your body ages. And yeah, just thinking from that perspective. And also, like what I said earlier, it's the small things, like if your child is going to work, how are they going to get to work? If they're catching the train and they have to cross the road, are they going to have issues crossing the road? Are they going to be able to hop on off the bus or on off the train? So it's just, sometimes it's the small things people don't think about, but it's more daily things that kind of make a difference to your life.
And Renata, what are some of the most effective supports and resources that were made available to you, either as an adult or through your growing up years?
Who's that to?
Renata.
Oh yeah, Renata, you're on mute.
Aroha mai, Amy. Sorry about that. I'm speaking and no one can hear me.
No worries.
Yeah. As As during my childhood, I had a very young, a teenage mum who wasn't in tune with sort of what was going on in the medical front and sort of the trends of the 90s. Like a popular one I've heard from many of my peers is start walking to school. This is what they were told, and you'll get better at it and it'll improve your walking. That's something that's echoed frequently in the 90s, but because my mum wasn't hanging out with those other mums, I am, my hips and knees are perhaps better off these days. So sometimes tying in with the services, these ideas go through the community. But as an adult, I think a lot of the services have been more tailored when I've connected with someone like yourself, Amy, and I've started to unlearn the learned behaviors, the internal ableism that was instilled in me from a young age. And also, I feel that I was all disabled people are seen a bit through a pure lens, and we're expected to be pure. We're not expected to go out and date and find a disabled guy who's a blimmin' little bugger who's going around dating a lot of girls and breaking hearts. That's not what I was told to expect. So I was warned a lot by well-intended counsellors and social workers that there are these able-bodied guys and they're going to try and take advantage of you. And so I entered friendships and relationships with these disabled boys, and some of them were just as bad, if not worse. And these are some of the services that I work in the sector that I'm trying to instill, is that in our community, we have the same feelings and urges as our able-bodied peers. And I think that's what we really need to work on shaping, is making sure that we are not too sheltered. So we're raising disabled people who are coming out well-rounded with their eyes open, and also that they're not afraid to want to be like a 20-year-old that wants to go on a pub crawl with their other 20-year-old mates. You know, I think the services that help us to be on par with socially with our peers and to have these experiences are the best services and the most helpful ones, even though they're the ones that perhaps make us a bit more bolshy and so confident. They might be the ones that make parents a bit scared. But I think in the long run, it's arming us to be strong, forthright, well-rounded, and able to deal with life, what life throws at us, a bit better if we're having the experiences at the right age. Yeah, that's what I'd say is most helpful. Those kinds of things.
And we talked about this recently with Arthur, but I have just been thinking as you've been talking, it's that sense that New Zealand is a signatory to the rights of the child, the UN Convention, and a whole lot of things around childhood. But I think children should have the right to learn what growing up is, and there should be a lifespan approach for children when they're talking about disabilities. It should be a sense of that children have a right to grow up, and they have a right to grow up to be whatever young adults they can be.
They can be and want to be. And I think we spend a lot of our childhood talking to specialists and adults and services. And so when I was 7 to 10 years old, I feel that I was far more accomplished than my peers at speaking to adults, because those are the people that were speaking to me on a regular basis, and they were monitoring me. Where we have to grow up in some aspects a lot quicker, but then there are other aspects where we're so sheltered we can get to 30 and have no idea how to manage our finances and to just deal with the unexpected. And I think that's what the shock is really jarring. So I think we need to keep real life in mind, because sometimes families and even well-intended support workers, they shower us with so much. I say they almost cross over, so they actually grow to love us so much and they build us up, and there's all this palaver about you don't let anything hold you back. But then you turn 30, your metabolism, this sounds really depressing, your metabolism slows down, you get a bit chubby, you're not a cute little girl in a mini wheelchair anymore. Now you're a bit of a fatty, and you struggle to go up hills by yourself, and there's not as many volunteers to help you get up that hill, where when you were a kid and weighed half as much, everyone's pushing you up the hill and outings are a breeze. So I think it's preparing our people with disabilities for real life, and that it is going to be isolated. And it sounds sad, but when you're not cute anymore, it's a bit like puppies. They get adopted really quickly at the shelters, where the older dogs, they get a lot less attention. And I think that fallback in attention really impacts on our young adults, because it's a real shock to the system and to the ego. And I think services should be preparing us to be able to deal with that and take it in our stride.
You know, I found the opposite. As a guy, I found that when I was young, none of the females wanted anything to do with me, because they were into the body perfect guys that had, you know, the rugby players or whatever. But when I got older, it was more about my mind than about the way I looked. And I had a lot more fun when I was older with relationships and stuff like that than I did when I was young. I felt that I was on the shelf with all my friends had girlfriends, and I'd sit around with them while they were playing rugby or whatever they were doing. So I got to know, I relate better with females than I do with males even now, because I spent a lot of time as a young man in the company of women.
That's interesting. I wonder if that's a gender, if that's gender roles are sort of impacting how it plays out throughout our lifespan.
Does anybody have any? You go, Helena.
I was gonna say, I agree with what Renata said. Pretty much preparing ourselves for just, you know, the daily stuff, and I agree with the fact that, like, as a child, like, if you're struggling to, I don't know, walk up a hill or get off the bus or something, people are more mindful around that. But as an adult, no one notices. And so you don't get that offer of help so much, and people aren't as conscious or mindful, especially as someone like me who may not come across as having a disability at times. Often people just forget. So yeah, it's and, like, for example, like if you're a teenager or someone in their 20s, if they want to go out with their friends, they don't necessarily want their parents dropping them off. So thinking about things like, oh, so how are they gonna, how is their son or daughter gonna be able to get themselves from A to B, kind of thing. It's the things that people don't think about, which may end up making the most difference from a health perspective, or mental health, or social perspective as well.
And I also think it's really important to acknowledge from a perspective, like, everybody here today, Renata, Barry, Helena, and I are all grumpy and stroppy, and we're good at getting what we need. But I think it's very much important that these lessons are valuable, whatever the child or young person or adult can do, because they're going to need to engage with the world one way or another, even if they have even if they have other conditions or learning disabilities or whatever they are still going to have to engage with this outside world once their primary caregivers can no longer care for them. So the more the outside world is slowly let in, the better. And it can be with training wheels, like it can just be with siblings or cousins or starting that process, but very much it needs to occur irrespective of disability.
Oh, I found, you know, it was so good getting into a sport where I had, excuse me, friends that were, and they've stayed with me. They're still friends to this day. And after the rowing, I got in with a group of guys, and they would come and pick me up automatically on the weekend. We'd go out to parties and things, and there was always one of the guys would pick me up as part of the crew. And in fact, they got very upset when I started to acknowledge, because I was 18 before I realized I had a real disability. I knew I had a disability, but I hadn't really thought about it. And it wasn't until I saw other disabled people being treated like we went along to the local workshop after school, and they had people cutting up bits of foam and basket weaving, and I sat there and realized that this is the way people see us, is just being able to do those simple tasks. And I saw it as my responsibility to go out and raise awareness for disabled people. And that's what I've done for the rest of my life, because I have a voice. And like you say, Amy, I'm grumpy and I'm very keen to put my point of view, whether people want to hear it or not. So, and I mean, I drive, I have a vehicle. The people of Dunedin, that's in the South Island of New Zealand, raised the funds to buy my first car when I was 21. And I've never looked back. And my second car, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but the second car, I designed how I drove myself, and I did it illegally. So I had it all attached to the steering wheel and the pedals and that, because I've got no arms and I've got very short legs. And I used to drive, I've driven in America, I've driven in Australia, around New Zealand, with the system that I worked out myself. I never got it certified. So, being a rebel, it was just part of my makeup from the people that I used to hang out with.
Oh, well, I'm
Anyway.
driving because of Barry, Amy, because he saw me waiting for a taxi and he's like, what the hell are you doing? If I can do it, you can do it. So that made me not listen to an OT and go and just enroll for lessons, and I'm fine now. But I mean, it does take that connecting, I think, with other disabled people sometimes, just to give you a kick up the bum and find that courage to challenge things as well, because often we're told you can't a lot, and adult life is a lot of learning how to challenge, and it's a balance of when to challenge things and when to accept it. And I think I probably sit in the middle. I think Helena's a lot more responsible than me, and Barry's a bit more naughty. So I think I'm somewhere in the middle of the two. But but I think it's finding that balance of when to accept things and also when to be a rebel and break the law and whatnot. So definitely push the boundaries, but don't do it in the way where I guess it puts yourself at such a huge risk. Unless you're Barry and you break the law, and it doesn't matter. But I mean, for the majority, I think we need a bit more of a balance there. But yeah, he's paving the way for all of us.
Yeah. Are there any questions in the chat?
I mean, this is Tony. I grew up quite luckily. My parents made sure I had as normal life as possible. I was able to enjoy going out and like, once I got to teenager, yes, it got a lot harder because I realized all my mates had left town, and I was stuck, and that really became to learn or realize that you have a disability. And it took quite a while to overcome. But then I got my driver's license, and that changed the whole world.
And again, it's about that kind of figuring out a way to live with your disability, but also pushing the boundaries. People talk a lot about he overcame his disability. And I don't necessarily like that language, because your disability goes with you wherever you are. It's just a matter of expanding your world around whatever you're given. Trish, do you want to say something?
Yes, please. For me, my name is Trish Milkway. I'm 51 years old. I have CP, short for cerebral palsy. I was brought up for the first 5 years in my own family life. Then from the age of 5 to the age of 20, I was put into institution, and that was not good years. For me, I still struggling to find out who I am, how I work. I believe I have to find what to get what I believe in. And to this day, I still find it. I believe all adults have entitled to ongoing therapy. And I will fight for that with the belief all adults should be able to get more physio if they need it. But the health, there's nothing evil when you leave school.
Yes, it's a problem we're working on, very much so.
That people say, oh no, you don't need physiotherapy because you're fine. Why did I know? I got tight muscles.
Mm, very much so. Do we have a couple of questions in the chat, Mahmood?
There was a question around what do
Yeah.
you tell young children?
Yes.
The Julian,
Who wants to tackle that first?
Julian, they are curious. If you teach them at the young age, they have the spirit, they have experience with people with disabilities. Yeah.
I don't mind starting the discussion because I have a son.
Sure.
Obviously, I didn't have him, but his mother had CP, and I didn't want children, but I had him, and it's been fantastic. But I would say the same as I did to him: is to start dreaming big. Don't slow the vision down. Get even at a young age, dream. What's the next stage that you want to do? Set some goals for people so
Yes.
they feel like they're achieving something. You know, my son wanted to be a vet, so we went around all the vets, and someone said to me, what if he doesn't want to be a vet? I said, doesn't matter. It's about him looking at what he wants to achieve. It's the journey. We're on a journey from when we're born to the day we die, and we're all on part of that journey. So it doesn't matter where we are or what we achieve. It's actually experiencing that journey, and we do achieve things on the way. And I think it's really important to remember that.
And I think too, adaptations can happen with your question about what advice would you give parents of young people.
Yeah.
I would say adaptations can be made later, and it's very tempting for a lot of parents to say, well, I'll do anything for my child, and that becomes, I'll do anything to make them as normal as possible. And often you've got to remember that the child in your child comes first, not correcting their disability. So you do all the stuff you do with your other children, but you just adapt something for your child-specific needs. And I think one of the biggest things that I think you can help your child with a disability to have is to understand and have a relationship with their own disability. So it's not just something they just don't go to, you just don't go to the IEPs, or you just don't do all the stuff for them. They start to build an understanding of what it means to have a disability.
And I
Yeah,
think that, oh, sorry, go Helena.
No, you go first.
I think that people with disabilities, it happens during the journey of sort of childhood. We start to look at things with a very strategic lens. For me, it started with class relays, and everybody would run 20 meters and tag the next person. And for me to participate, I made sure I was in the class in the team with the fastest boys, and they ran first. So I would have a huge lead to enable me to participate and not make our team losers as well. So that's a lot of strategic thinking for a 6 to 7-year-old. But I mean, that's something that comes with disability, because we naturally want to strive and we want to join in, and it's not really about mum or dad pairing me up or making me go with someone else. Like, these are things that just happen when we're given the opportunity to socially connect with our classmates and our peers. And often if you ask for a hand, they're willing to help you, and it makes them feel good to join, and it opens the hearts and minds of their peers as well. But you do have to give them a chance to do it, and sometimes it fails dismally and I would be crying, but I mean, it's a learning experience, it's a learning curve, and it's given me more grit in adult life. So you do need to give them the chance to metaphorically fall over and scrape their knees and learn some lessons the hard way. I think that's what I come across a lot working in the youth disability space, is really wrapping their children in cotton wool, and it makes things a lot harder when you're trying to teach these lessons with big adult grown up responsibilities in the mix too. So definitely give them the options to explore what they can do for themselves before you get in there and unintentionally take over. Yeah.
Totally agree
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah, I agree with what Renata said there. Like what I said before, I grew up in a immigrant family. We're all about the tough love. So that's just the way my mum parents, and that's kind of the way that they're always known. But I kind of wanted to touch on essentially, like, I don't really have a diplomatic way of putting this, but more just not making your child's life too easy. And that's similar to, not wrapping them up in cotton wool. But for example, from a practical perspective, for example, obviously it depends on the child and their ability. But for me, like, for example, I can walk, but I'm not the greatest walker in the world. But for example, instead of getting dropped off from door to door everywhere, allow your child to walk a distance instead of dropping them right at the front door outside the shopping mall. Drop them off further away so they can get that walking in between. Because little bits of movement throughout the day, that compounds, and that actually over time builds mobility and resilience. So trying not to make your child's life too easy for them would actually be good for them in the long term.
And I
Good
think
on you.
one of the things that is best for children is that health professionals, and I think that parents and families acknowledge their own trauma with the disability separate from the child, because in a lot of senses the cotton wool comes from parents struggling with their own trauma, and I think that it needs to be acknowledged in a separate way. And just going on to Kayla's question about helping health professionals, helping teens navigate, and I think that's one of the things that's really difficult, because protracted parenting is a thing, because for a lot of people with disabilities, their parents form a central role for a lot longer than it is typical. So I think in a way, the best thing you can do as health professionals is to look at the ways of what narratives are the individual with disabilities projecting, and what narrative are the parents understanding, and in what ways are they communicating? Is the parent coming from a place of sheer terror, and is the young person coming from a place of rebelling for the sake of rebelling, or And is there a middle ground that they can work towards?
Thanks, Amy. I think
Yeah.
it's really nice to hear the comments from the other panelists, because I have a lot of teens that I've seen over my time who are not doing what their peers do. So obviously the panel here has said, you know, sometimes that takes a lot of assertiveness, but sometimes it's the parents that are not giving them the opportunities, and the teenagers see that. And I think it's a really difficult navigation. It's also sometimes you don't actually know that that's not happening, but things like, you know, like Helena said, walking into the shopping mall independently of their parents so they can meet their friends, or those sorts of things, so that they've got that socialization. So as a young adult and then adult, they've already experienced those things. So I think there is a lot of protecting, and it's you know, there's a lot of talk about protecting and pushing, and what's the balance of that. And sometimes the teenager does the pushing, and sometimes the parent does the pushing. But I think what Renata said was really resonated, that sometimes we expect people with disabilities to not be naughty, or to, you know, always toe the line, because they're so used to being with adults from a young age. And I think it's really nice to give them that freedom to say, actually, no, I'm not going to do that, because other teenagers are saying that all the time, aren't they? So I think it's really important that they know that's okay to say. I think they often feel they're always saying yes to things, and they're always agreeing to what other choices people are making. But I think it's really nice to hear the panelists saying, hey, that should be brought in at a younger age, where they have more voice, really.
Yeah.
And also, one of the biggest things that and this is something Renata said that's always stuck with me, is that we want parents to be able to die peacefully. Like, all parents are going to die, and we want them to know that they've done everything possible to slowly build structures around their child, and they can't do that when they're in their 70s and 80s and their children are in their 60s. So the more that we can allow parents to even think about dying peacefully, that the better, because I speak to parents who can't comprehend the idea of dying because they don't know what will happen to their child. So the more we can bring that across, the better.
I think also that like there's a lot of guilt from especially women around when a child with a disability is born, because they feel it's their fault. Like my mother took thalidomide, and I'm thalidomide, and it took up to the day she died, she still felt guilty about what had happened, even though she knew I was independent and I didn't need her to be around. The guilt was still there.
And I think, Gayla, going back to your question, it's around knowing where both the teenager and the parents are, because the parent may be reacting to something, that a dialogue that's in their head, like the idea that, oh my God, if I let them go to the mall by themselves, they're going to be teased mercilessly, or they're going to be tripped over, or all these things. So knowing what the parents are telling themselves, it can be really useful.
I think another thing I wanted to add was that, for example, just like, if a child wants to go to the movies with their friends, and if you're a bit concerned about that, another way to get around that is maybe get to know who the friends are, and maybe even get to know the friend's parents. So, for example, they want to go for sleepovers, and that's kind of how my mum did that, because she, as a teenager, I assume she would have been nervous, me being out by myself, but she got to know who my friends were and who their parents were, and she put the trust in that I was in with people who would actually look out for me. So I think there's a bit of a balance, but just getting to know who your teenagers are actually spending time with, and also a little bit about just letting them fall, they make mistakes. Otherwise, that's how you learn and grow. So not being overly protective, because I have seen and heard of lots of parents who want to make their kids' life absolutely perfect and like accommodated to in every single way. But in reality, as soon as they're not a child, as soon as they go out into the workforce, life will not be that way. They're going to have to adapt. So if they've grown up expecting every single element of life to be accommodated or customized for them, suddenly if they're put into a foreign environment when they are not the center of attention, they're going to really struggle.
And that brings us, I guess, to some of the take-home messages. And I just want to re-emphasize that childhood is the blueprint for the lifespan. Like, and raising a child and a young person with a disability is very much a marathon, not a sprint. Like, if you don't do 100 exercises by the time they're 4.5, it's not going to be the end of the world, in the sense that you're raising a child, not the perfect child with a disability. You're not working to erase the disability. You're raising a child first and foremost. The disability stuff you'll learn along the way, but you don't need to become shadow therapists. You need to become parents who know how to advocate, but that's not the same thing as being shadow therapists. New Zealand is starting the process of working towards independence and working towards strength-based resiliency, and very much the childhood leaves a lasting impression. Thank you very much. And we're going to finish with a karakia, as is traditional. Thank you, Renata.
Okay. Ka whakia te tapu, kia wātia, ai te ara, kia turuki, whakataka ai, kia turuki, whakataha ai, hui e, kai ki e.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And feel free to jump on to the next round of the International Academy Live Stream. We've got the rest of the world to go, and Australia is next.
Yay, thank you so
Yay.
much, everybody. And we've
You're so-
had two. We've had Fiji and now New Zealand.
Yeah.
So go
Yeah.
go the Southern Hemisphere.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Yeah,
Bye.
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 good.